Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar on the challenge of resource management, specifically today looking at water management. And this is the final one of our revision series, looking at a variety of different case studies and some revision on topics that you've got to study for your GCSE, your IB and your A-level. We're delighted today to be joined by Richard Thompson from the ESPLA Education Centre in Mallorca. Richard is from Brighton originally and has an MA in Geography as well as a Master's in Education. And he's worked as a teacher in over 16 different countries on 4 different continents. And he currently runs the ESPLA Education Centre in Mallorca, looking at offering different types of fieldwork and geographical studies to geography students of all ages. And I was absolutely privileged and blessed to visit the centre last year to see what the team over there are able to offer. And it really is the most amazing, unique and bespoke experience for students. Richard today will be delivering our webinar, which focuses on Mallorca as a case study for water sustainability. As always, if you have any questions, please do contact us. Richard will give you some details both at the beginning and at the end of how you can contact him on Twitter or via email. And obviously, if you do have any questions for Discover the World Education, then please do get in contact with us directly. So I am delighted to hand you over to Richard now, who's going to go through this presentation, and I will come back to you at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Karen. So yeah, my name's Richard. And I'm based in Mallorca. You can see Mallorca circled there on the map of Europe. So wherever you live in the world, water is of vital importance. And as you probably know, human beings can only survive for about 3 days without it. Now, on a small island with a limited supply, it's an issue that is constantly on everyone's mind. Now, Mallorca is the largest island in the Balearic Islands archipelago in the Western Mediterranean. It's only a 2-hour flight from the UK and is an extremely popular holiday destination. You might well have been here yourself. And with regards to the issue of water supply, Mallorca can be viewed as a microcosm of the world. Now let's go to the first slide. Now, the first thing you see when you look at a map of Mallorca is that it is shaped like the head of a goat. You've got the beard here, the sort of the mouth, the nose, and the horns up in the northeast of the island. To give you an idea of scale, it is about 62 miles from the furthest point west to the furthest point east, and about 47 miles from north to south. In terms of topographical features, the Tramontana Mountains, which are basically along the northwest facing coast, you can see here. And the island's capital is Palma. Major towns include Inca, Alcudia, and Manacor, which is where the tennis player Rafa Nadal is from. Mallorca has typical Mediterranean climate. That means mild winters and hot, dry summers. Now, as a result of this, rainwater supplies are irregular and drought is an ever-present threat. There are no permanent rivers or lakes due to the island's geology and topography. And if some of you are wondering what these two blue patches are here, we'll come on to those a little bit later. The main source of fresh water here is subterranean. Now, before we look at the current situation, let's look back in history. Some people live near natural springs, but the majority relied on wells, and you can see an example top left. There are still 60,000 of them dotted around the island. And wells have been found by archaeologists in settlements that date back 3,000 years. Now, wells are obviously very, very dangerous to young children. So in Mallorca, to stop children accidentally falling into them, They are warned from a very young age about an evil woman called Maria de Engancha. And now she lives in Wells, and it's best to avoid her, as Maria de Engancha can be loosely translated as Maria will grab you. Now, Arabic people from North Africa ruled Majorca just over 1,000 years ago, and they invented wind pumps for irrigation. And you can see an example top right. And they can still be seen today on the farmland around the international airport, just outside Palma. Bottom left is a 250-year-old public well in my village. My village is called San Juan. It's in the very center of the island. And this wheel was turned by a donkey, and earthenware pots were lowered on a metal belt down into the well to extract the water. However, when there were droughts or in the hot summer months, wells were in danger of running dry. So people who could afford to built underground rainwater storage chambers beneath their houses. Now, when it rained, the water that fell onto the tiled roofs was channeled via pipes into these subterranean cisternas. That's the name for them here. And you can see the entrance to one of these cisternas, bottom right. This is in my parents-in-law's house, which was built over 150 years ago. And they still use this today. If they want some water, they lower the metal buckets and scoop water from the surface. Any sediment will have sunk to the bottom, so it's absolutely fine to drink. Now, in the village, there's also a very large public cisterna next to a chapel on a hill. It's just outside the village. And my father-in-law remembers, as a child, seeing local women who didn't have their own well or cisterna walking up the hill and returning to their houses with a large earthenware pot filled with water carried on their head. And that was just 75 years ago. Okay, moving to the next slide. Now, the Tramontana Mountains, which I mentioned earlier, are largely formed from limestone. And if you studied karst topography, you will know that limestone is soluble and it can be slowly dissolved by acids in groundwater. Now, as a result of that, large cave systems can often be found. A limestone aquifer, which you can see in this diagram, can be described simply as a very large water-filled cave system. However, the availability of underground water is dependent on the amount of rainfall. And during a dry year, subterranean reserves here in Majorca may fall by between 30 and 50%. In Majorca, there are two large aquifers close to the mountains. And up until about 50 years ago, these, along with wells, wind pumps, and rainwater harvesting, were enough to provide the island with a sufficient supply of fresh water. Now, the term physical water scarcity, which Karen mentioned in her presentation, is when there is not enough water to meet all demands. And it's important to remember that the demand there includes the needs of ecosystems to function correctly. Now, in Majorca, demand increased dramatically in the 1960s, and the issue of water scarcity here became very, very real. So why was there the big increase in demand? Well, we've got here two graphs. Now, the graph on the left shows the dramatic increase in Majorca's population over the past 80 years, from just over 300,000, and that was in 1964, to a peak of nearly 12 million in 2019. Now, that's the graph on the right. That's the increase in tourist numbers, and then on the left we've got the population of Majorca going from 300,000 in the 1940s to nearly 900,000 today. So that's a tripling of the population in 80 years. Now, both of these graphs are linked. Why? Well, as tourist numbers increased, many workers from mainland Spain migrated to Majorca in search of work in the tourism sector. Now, and added to this, many tourists fell in love with the island during their holidays and decided to move here permanently. Now, the upshot of this was that in the 1960s, Mallorca started suffering from water stress. The demand for water was in danger of exceeding the available amount. And water stress was particularly high in the summer months. High numbers of tourists increased the demand for water. However, aquifer water levels were dropping rapidly as less than 10% of rainfall occurs in the summer. So, the Mallorcan government decided to construct 2 reservoirs in the Tramontana Mountains, Cuba, pictured at the top here, and Gorge Blau. A combination of higher levels of precipitation in the mountains and a possibility of capturing meltwater made the site choice pretty obvious. On the downside, they were constructed in what is now a nature reserve and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Would they be allowed to construct them today? It's doubtful. And have the amounts of water provided justified the construction cost and damage to a natural environment? You need to be the judge of that. They currently provide just less than 3% of Mallorca's fresh water. Now, in the 70s and 80s, with regards to water, Mallorca survived the annual increases in population size and tourist numbers. However, by the 1990s or the early 1990s, water stress led to the regional government arranging for water to be transported by a tanker ship from the Spanish mainland. Taps running dry in hotels would have seriously impacted the tourist industry, a major source of revenue for the island. So, from 1995 to 1998, at a cost of €6 million a year, the good ship Móstoles, pictured here, sailed back and forth from Tarragona to Palma, bringing fresh water from the River Ebro on the Spanish mainland. Not everyone was happy. Unfortunately, this led to water conflict, another term we need to consider. Now, this is a term to describe a conflict between countries, states, or groups over the rights to access water resources. In this case, many people from the Spanish region of Catalonia objected that their natural resource was being sold and shipped to another Spanish region, the Balearic Islands. And to add an insult to injury, the Mallorcans complained about the taste. Now, water conflict is nothing new. There are recorded instances from around the world going back 6,000 years. Now, 1999, the Palma Bay desalination plant was opened, thus alleviating water stress yet further and eliminating the need to ship water over from the mainland. Now, as you probably know, desalination is the process of making seawater, salt water, drinkable by removing the salt. It uses an awful lot of electricity and is not cheap. I've got a statistic here for you. The cost of producing 1,000 litres of fresh water at one of these plants in Mallorca is €4, as opposed to 50 cents for water obtained from an aquifer. So it's 8 times more expensive. There's also the issue of what to do with the byproduct, brine. Now, brine is heavily concentrated salt water, which is normally pumped back into the sea. Now, the problem here is that it is denser than normal seawater and therefore sinks to the seabed. And as brine is deoxygenated, living organisms can't survive in it. Around Mallorca, there are extensive seagrass meadows on the seabed, an incredibly important environmental resource. And it is alleged that they have been adversely affected by the discharge of brine from desalination plants here, allegedly. Now, let's have a look at the next slide. At the beginning of the 21st century, another natural water source was identified. The Sacostera spring on the island's north coast was emptying into the sea. And you can see a picture of that on the far left. And a study concluded that if this was tapped, it could provide large quantities of fresh water for the island. So the Sacostera pipeline was constructed and opened in 2008. And you can see the bottom right, some of the ships there involved in the construction process. And the idea would bring water from the north coast of Majorca to Palma and then be pumped to other villages as well. It cost 78 million euros, a huge sum of money. However, in its best year, it has only pumped 50% of the amount of water that was originally predicted. And in February 2016, a Mallorcan newspaper called Última Hora reported that it was currently pumping only 2% of the normal amount. 2010, 2 more desalination plants were opened, one in Alcudia in the northeast of the island, and the other in Andratx in the southwest. Now, both of these areas have a lot of tourism. And currently, the 3 desalination plants provide 10% of the island's fresh water. The economic benefit from continued tourism growth is seen as outweighing the high production costs. So, what about now? With regards to fresh water, is Mallorca moving towards a sustainable resource future? Let's have a look. Now, in 2016, the Mallorcan government decided to charge tourists between 50 cents and €2 per night for staying on the island. And the amount depended on the type of accommodation. In 2020, the prices have increased a little bit, but it's still not a huge amount of money. And this tax, called an eco-tax, would be used to establish sustainable infrastructures and to invest in environmental projects. Now, at the time, the hotel industry was absolutely horrified and predicted that their businesses would be adversely affected. In the end, that didn't happen. And in general, tourists understood once it was explained to them. Over 400 million euros has been generated to date, and examples of projects include an expansion of the Palma metro system, which perhaps helps reduce the number of cars on the road, sand dune protection measures, and the signposting of cycle routes around the island. Cycle tourism is big business here in Mallorca. Now here, once again, we can see the graphic of a limestone aquifer. And 75% of fresh water in Mallorca currently comes from aquifers, the 2 main aquifers that I mentioned. Now, there are various problems with this. Groundwater has been polluted with both nitrates and salt water. Now, the nitrates have come from chemical fertilizers used by the agricultural industry, and also from poorly maintained house septic tanks in rural areas. Saltwater intrusion, as it's called, occurs as 90% of the available water in Mallorcan aquifers is extracted. Now, water extraction from the aquifers causes the level of fresh groundwater to drop, which in turn reduces its water pressure. And it's this that allows salt water to enter. That's because salt water has a higher mineral content than fresh water. It's denser and therefore has a higher water pressure. The water pipe system. Now, Mallorca is not alone in Europe in having an aging system of water pipes. In countries in Northern Europe with high levels of precipitation, such as the UK, this is not quite so serious. However, on an island such as Mallorca, the fact that over 28% of water is lost due to leaks in poor quality pipes is a major problem. Now, on a positive note, work is ongoing to replace and repair old pipes, but this is time consuming, disruptive, and very expensive. With regards to wastewater management and recycling, good news is that substantial advances have been made. 11% of water in Mallorca comes from treated water. And this is used by the agricultural industry for irrigation and also by the fire brigade. It's used for watering public gardens and for cleaning the streets. Urban areas, such as Palma, have almost 100% of their wastewater recycled. The use of grey water in Mallorca is not so common. Now, grey water is the wastewater generated by houses or office buildings that does not include toilet waste. And obviously this requires additional plumbing, though these days architects often include this in their building designs. Tourists these days are a lot more environmentally aware, a lot more than they were in the past. So last year in 2019, the Mallorcan Water Board created a campaign targeting tourists arriving for their holidays, and a video was filmed at Palma Airport. The campaign also included posters in hotels suggesting how guests could reduce their water consumption while on holiday. And for the majority of the hotels, it was viewed as a win-win situation. Their guests admired them for doing their bit to protect a valuable local resource, and the hotels also managed to reduce their water bill. Anyway, we're going to watch the video now, and I think it is incredibly innovative and powerful. Let me just share this with you here. And that's full screen. And it's entitled, "Can a Suitcase Make You Think?"
Por su propio interés, rogamos mantengan sus pertenencias controladas en todo momento.
Please do not leave baggage unattended.
No sabía qué, viene desde lejos, viene acercándose.
The difference in the water has shocked me the most.
That amount of water and also the influx of tourists, anybody can see that that's not enough.
Also nein, ich wusste nicht, dass es auf den Balearen keine Flüsse gibt. Ich wusste auch nicht, dass es keine Seen gibt.
I don't know where you get all the water from.
No, I didn't know you had to desolate the water.
Ich wohne direkt in München, daher die Wasserversorgung kommt, glaube ich, aus den Alpen.
It's just because back home there's a lot of rivers and things like that, you know. Just assume that everywhere else has them.
Because the tourists don't know. I don't know.
Maybe not flush the toilet so many times.
Ya les voy aquí a restringir las duchas a mis amigos de que nada, 2 minutitos y corriendo.
Y no dejar el grifo, ¿no?, en marcha para ayudar a la isla, que es muy guapa y me gusta mucho.
Well, I think when you go to a hotel you think, oh, it's all right, it's not my water and it's not my bill, but you have to consider it for the environment.
I will definitely think about it, more so now I've seen this.
So let's just return to the presentation. Now, I think that video, the campaign, it's been pretty successful, and it's good to end on a positive note. Things are perhaps beginning to move in the right direction, and hopefully the resource of water in Mallorca, it will be protected for years to come. So if you have any questions about what you've heard today, feel free to contact me. My name is Richard Thompson, and I'm on Twitter @MallorcaJog, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have about water on the island or any other geographical topics as well. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm now going to hand you back to Karen.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Richard. It is just the most amazing case study, and what I found really interesting about the presentation today was what's happened historically and kind of where we are now, but also in particular the tourists' sort of like reaction when sort of like the visual element of how much water they actually get and how much water they're actually using. I thought that was really, really quite powerful as well. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are watching this have actually been to Mallorca and probably had no idea that they actually are quite water stressed at quite a lot of the time of the year. Mallorca as a case study, we know that it reinforces all the different points that we looked at in our previous webinar, looking at sort of like the theory behind water sustainability and scarcity and everything. And yesterday we talked about demand and supply, about water transfers, desalination. But I think also what's also interesting is when we talk about the 3 pillars of sustainability, the Mallorcan government and environmental agency that they have over there are really trying to take into account all those different 3 pillars, so looking at the economy, looking at the environment, and also taking into account the people as well, because that's so important. We've talked so much over the last 6 sessions on what geographers actually have to do, about how they have to make connections, how they have to make links. They have knowledge and understanding of a case study, but actually it's so good to add in sort of like all that extra information to really show that they've got the X factor which other students don't have. And I think this particular case study really gives them that X factor. So, thank you so very, very much. We really are quite honoured that you've joined us. And thank you to everybody who's joined us on this webinar. And please do share it amongst your students. It's completely free. You can share it as many times as you like. Thank you for joining us for the whole series. And it just leaves me to say that, just stay safe, have a wonderful Christmas break, and we look forward to seeing you for new webinars in the new year. Thank you. Goodbye.